So this morning, after 2 decades, a new top-selling beer in the U.S. Mexican lager Modelo Especial was the top-selling beer last month, overthrowing Bud Light. There are a couple things at play here, including flat-out changing taste, but also the backlash from a social media post by transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. CNN Chief Business Correspondent Christine Romans here with the details. Romans.
Hi there, John. Well, yeah, Modelo prevails, pardon the pun, over the king of beers, dethroned here. Bud Light, in the most recent month, Bud Light's share of the market was less than Modelo. So it lost its top standing there. 8.4% of beer sales in May belonged to Modelo, only 7.3% Bud Light. So that is a big shift. Now, you're right, there's some changing tastes happening. And also, this is the month of May. There's Cinco de Mayo. And there's also a really clever advertising promotion campaign from Modelo. And changing tastes, analysts tell us that already there's been an affinity, a growing affinity for Mexican beer and spirits for some time now. So that's sort of a tipping point that you're seeing here. When you look at overall sales, though, sales for Bud Light down more than 24% in the month. That is kind of a staggering number here. And for Modelo, sales up 12.2%. So these numbers are telling a story. You mentioned the transgender influencer who had one customized can of Bud Light and did an Instagram post, and conservative media and conservative social media went on a very forceful boycott of the beer. And so that is one other kind of factor here at play. So you've got two things happening. You've got changing tastes. You've got several months, actually years, of declining tastes for light beer in particular. And then you have this social media fail, quite frankly, from Bud Light. I mean, a lot of corporate directors are watching what Bud Light did in this whole situation and finding a lot of fault with how it managed and behaved the situation from a corporate and PR standpoint.
Bud Light tumbling from top seller status in the United States as America's new best-selling beer comes from Mexico, Modelo Especial. Now, part of it may be changing tastes. In recent years, drinkers have shown a growing preference for Mexican beers and spirits like tequila. But of course, the classic Anheuser-Busch brand has also been embroiled in a culture war clash. This drop comes after transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney partnered with Bud Light and posted about it on Instagram. That led to a right-wing backlash. Let's bring in CNN's Nathaniel Meyerson, who joins us with more. Nathaniel, what does the Bud Light data tell us?
Right, Boris. So America's top-selling beer is not American anymore. Modelo has overtaken Bud Light. It controls about 8.4% of the beer market for the month ending on June 3rd, compared to Bud Light, which slipped to 7.3% of the market. And now Bud Light has held this title since 2001, but we do see more beer drinkers switching to imported beers like Modelo and Corona. And clearly the post with Dylan Mulvaney and the anti-LGBT backlash has taken a toll on Bud Light sales. They dropped about 24% for the month ending in June compared to 12.2% increase for Modelo. So this just shows the backlash and how quickly it can spread on social media.
And Nathaniel, Bud Light isn't the only brand dealing with this anti-transgender, anti-LGBTQ backlash, right?
Yeah, so a lot of other brands are caught up in the political culture wars over gender identity and sexual orientation. Disney and its opposition with Florida to the so-called Don't Say Gay law. Target, which was forced to remove some Pride merchandise from its shelves because of threats. And then Nike also partnered with Dylan Mulvaney, and they're facing backlash as well.
Interesting developments there, especially when it comes to Bud Light. Nathaniel Meyerson, thank you so much for that. Brianna?
Then falling flat, Bud Light no longer the top-selling beer in the United States. So which beer topped it? And Vanessa, I guess a victim of the culture wars, Bud Light no longer the top-selling beer in America. So what is?
Yeah, there's a new beer king in town, Modelo Especial. It's a Mexican beer company, and this has overtaken Bud Light as the best-selling beer in America after Bud Light held this title for 2 decades. So you have Modelo sales the 4 weeks leading up to June 3rd, so in May, up 12.2%, and you have Bud Light dropping by 24%.
8.4%. And experts say that part of that is because Modelo has had really good advertising, great packaging, and they're riding the bump after Cinco de Mayo. But as you mentioned, Bud Light has had a lot of backlash, conservative backlash, over a partnership that they did with transgender activist and actress Dylan Mulvaney. That has played out over weeks. We have seen Bud Light sales come down. A little glimmer of hope for Bud Light, though, Jake. They still hold the sales, the top leading sales year to date, but in May, overtaken for the first time in 2 decades, Jake.
Vanessa Yurkevich, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I also want to ask you about this. Bud Light is no longer officially the top-selling beer in America, but this comes after a social media promotion with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney and the backlash that came as a result of that. Now, taking the top spot, I guess ironically,
Miller
is the
Lite?
Oh,
it's not.
The Mexican lager, Modelo. But I mean, from Bud Light's perspective, does this prove their critics right that they made that move in a way that really did not jive with their audience, with their customers?
Look, from a business perspective here, and some of the audience may disagree with me, taking the politics aside, I think it was a terrible business decision. You need to know who your consumer base is. There was some studies that came out in 2019 that was published by Bloomberg Business Week, and there was sort of an interesting aggregate of the types of drinks that liberals typically favor and the type of drinks that conservatives typically favor. On the conservative side, it was bourbon, and it was light beers, Coors, Miller Lite, and Bud Light. Close to 50% of their consumers. Now, most of those folks are conservative, they're blue-collar workers. So we, for the most part, sort of know as we debate these culture wars where that particular demo group rests as it pertains to gender and sexuality. So it's no surprise that conservatives have sort of come together and said, well, we're going to use our pockets, our dollars rather, and showcase our displeasure with Bud Light and now go somewhere else. And that's exactly what they've done.
I mean, and the numbers bear it out. Their sales were down 24% in the week that ended in June 3rd compared with the same
and
week
Miller Lite is now
last
having
year.
greater sales than Bud Light.
Well, the other interesting part on the business front, I think the argument that they were making was that this was about the future audience, not the present audience, maybe a younger audience, maybe a more tolerant audience. But
as a strategist, Abby, I look at data. And the data is pretty clear on what groups favor certain types of drinks and spirits. I'm not a beer guy, but I know a lot of conservative voters are beer people. It's inexpensive to buy. Know your audience, Bud Light. I'm all for being open-minded and accepting everybody. We should be that way. But a business should be about making money primarily, not losing money. And I don't know if by the third or fourth quarter, whether or not Bud Light will be able to see some financial gains.
yeah, maybe in the next couple of quarters, some of this backlash will fade away. Shermichael, thank you so much
Thanks, Abby.
for joining us. And coming up,